His comments at the Republican National Convention regarding Catholic politicians caused quite a stir last week. College football legend Lou Holtz is here to react. And should the pulpit be a politics-free zone? Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, will weigh in. And scores of children were rescued last week from human trafficking rings here in the United States. How prevalent is human trafficking and the trafficking of children? Advocate and attorney for children Yore returns with analysis. Finally, historian and political scientist Paul Kengor talks about his timely new book, The Devil and Karl Marx. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. What a lineup we have for you tonight. Lou Holtz, Bishop Joseph Strickland, Yore, and Paul Kengor. They're all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Let's get started.
Nobody has been a stronger advocate for the unborn than President Trump. The Biden-Harris ticket is the most radically pro-abortion campaign in history. They and other politicians are Catholics in name only and abandon innocent lives.
That was college football Hall of Fame coach Lou Holtz speaking to the Republican National Convention last week. The president of Notre Dame, Father John Jenkins, issued a statement distancing the university from those comments, and Democrat presidential candidate Joe Biden fired back as well. Joining me now with his reaction to all of it is Lou Holtz. Coach, thank you for being here. There were speakers at the RNC last week who were there to specifically speak to the pro-life issue. Why did you choose to speak about it?
Well, because I believe in it very strongly. I have a granddaughter that was adopted at birth. She's now a lawyer. She's married, expecting her first child 5 months. I think of all the great things and happiness she's brought in. Being a Catholic all my life, being raised and taught by the Sisters of Notre Dame and the various priests, that abortion is not the right thing to do. If you can't afford a child, I understand. If you don't want it because you feel inconvenient, I understand. But at least have the child, give it up for adoption. But I'm against abortion such as 9th month. I've looked back at what I said, and you know, I probably owe Joe Biden an apology because I can't really evaluate what's in his heart. But I do know this, that I don't criticize him. I've heard great things about him as a person, but I absolutely deplore the policy they have of 9th-month abortion. I can criticize the performance. I'm not criticizing the performer, and that was what was misinterpreted on this.
In an interview last Thursday, Joe Biden defended himself in the wake of some of these comments. Listen what he said.
Look, I'm not going to proselytize. I'm a practicing Catholic. I've been a practicing Catholic my whole life. I practice all the elements of my faith.
Your thoughts on Biden's response, Coach, but what does private practice of the faith, personal piety, have to do with the public support of abortion?
As I said, Raymond, I don't want to criticize what's in his heart, what he believes, but I do know this. That to me, if you're a Catholic, you do not really advocate abortion, particularly late-term abortion. And he's also made the comment, as I understand it, if elected president, he would declare war again on our little sisters of the poor. I mean, for 200 years, they've been dealing with the elderly, et cetera, and they have religious beliefs. And all of a sudden, we're going to say, no, you got to believe this, you got to do this because we say it. I am just... It goes more than just abortion. It goes to a lot of different things. We're talking about a way of life. We're talking about capitalism versus Marxism. There are so many things involved in this. Everybody wants to narrow it down to one little sentence you said or something else. But I'm an old individual. I worry about my grandchildren. I worry about my children. What made this country great? Why do we have a wall? Not to keep people in. There are millions of people want to come because it's been the most productive society history has seen the last couple hundred years. And that's what we're fighting for. That's what we're defending for. And abortion happens to be just one of the phases of it that I believe in strongly.
The president of Notre Dame, Father John Jenkins, released a statement after your speech, Coach. He said, while Coach Lou Holtz is a former coach at Notre Dame, his use of the university's name at the Republican National Convention must not be taken to imply that the university endorses his views, any candidate or any political party. Moreover, we Catholics should remind ourselves that while we may judge the objective moral quality of another's actions, we must never question the sincerity of another's faith. Now, I know Notre Dame means a lot to you. What was your first reaction to that statement, Coach, when you read it?
Well, I have great respect for Father Jenkins. He's been an outstanding president. He's providing great leadership there. But he knew, and everybody else in the country knew, that I wasn't there as a representative of Notre Dame. I happened to say, as I told the players at Notre Dame, if you didn't show up, who would miss you and why? If you didn't go home, would anybody miss you and why? Raymond, if your show ceased to exist, would your listeners miss it and why? The people you miss are those that add value in other people's lives. That's all it was. It wasn't I'm Notre Dame, and everybody in the country knows I'm not a spokesman for the University of Notre Dame. But I have great respect for him. I'm not going to criticize anything else. He has his opinion. I have mine. But I'm not going to be silenced. I'm not going to be intimidated. These are things that I believe. My wife is buried at Notre Dame. I may not be welcome to go visit her. And if I'm not buried next to her, I don't think she will even notice.
Well, I think you'll make the cut, Coach. I mean, but it shows a certain sensitivity, I think, on the part of Notre Dame, wanting to avoid any kind of controversy. But it's a Catholic university. I mean, that's the foundational principles and the morals that people equate with Notre Dame. What you were articulating.
What really surprises me is how many priests are pro-abortion. And you know, I've had so many Catholic universities, I'm talking about presidents of universities, write me and thanking me for my stand on it. But as I said at the top of the show, Raymond, I wished I hadn't worded it as such, the Catholic in name only, because I can't judge that, but I certainly condemn the policies that he advocates and I think is detrimental to this country.
Former players from Notre Dame, Coach, have taken issue with your support of President Trump due to what they feel are the president's views on race. One of your former players, Bobby Brown, had this to say about your speech at the RNC last week. I'd like your reaction.
It seems as though you abandoned us based on your alignment with the man who is at least very sympathetic to racists.
Your reaction to that, Coach Lou, what do you make of that? A player who clearly has his own political and personal views about this. Is he misinterpreting your statement?
Well, Bobby Brown played wide receiver, wonderful young man, very intelligent, very passionate about this. He wrote me that letter. It's the same thing, and I'm getting ready to answer it. I think that we evaluate people overall. It's not just about the president versus Joe Biden. It's about a philosophy of life about it. But let's also look at this. The one thing about President Trump, he has done more for prison reform. Black unemployment was the lowest. But the most important thing, he is advocating school choice. All the politicians send their children to private school. Oh, that's okay, but you can't send yours to a private school, and that's why we want to have school choice on this. Do you realize there's 17 high schools in the city of Baltimore? Not one student in those 17 high schools qualified or passed a certification test on math or English. That's critical. You give people an education. Education is the most important thing you can give somebody because it enables them to make good choices along the line. But no, all of a sudden, a school choice, okay. And let me tell you something else. It also would help the parochial Catholic schools. I went to St. Aloysius. I was in business for 100 years, taught by the nuns. But then the nuns were taught by lay people. They had to pay them. They could no longer stay open on that. But let's give them school choice. Let's give young people an opportunity to go to a good school, get a good education, and make good choices online. To me, that's the most important thing you can do. All of a sudden, no, that's not real important. They overlook it. And there's so many other things. And I know that most of the black athletes feel the way that Bobby Brown does. I still love them anyway. I'll be there for them if they want me to. If not, I'll move on with my life. That's their choice. But I'm going to tell you, when I recruited an individual, I didn't say that you have to believe what I believe. And this is what really bothers me the most. That what's happened in this country, there's only free choice if you agree with a Bobby Brown or somebody else. If you disagree, oh, you let me down. Everything's wrong. That's what's wrong. I'm down there at the Republican convention, came out on Thursday night. It was attacked by a mob, spit on, everything else, pushed, challenged. Because I have a view. There used to be, we had freedom of speech. You tell me when there's freedom of speech where you can't believe something without everybody saying, oh, you're wrong, you're a bad person, get out of here. That's what's wrong with this country. It's going in the wrong direction. That's what this election's all about. I've been called up for 7 months in quarantine because somebody makes a decision I can't go. I can only imagine what it's going to be like 7 years from now.
Coach, have you spoken to any of your former players or anyone at Notre Dame since your speech? I've been seeing a lot of email traffic, I will tell you, in the last week from alumni who were celebrating your speech and said, you know, thank God somebody's out there saying these things. What have you been hearing?
Well, I get a lot of mail. Most of it is very positive, but I don't run a focus group. I don't say, okay, I've been against I've been all for all the destruction and the rioting and everything else, but all of a sudden the focus group said, oh, that might be the wrong thing. So now I'm going to come out. I don't do that. I don't run polls. I speak from my heart, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says or what anybody else thinks. When I sit back and I look at it, as I said this, I owe Joe Biden an apology for one thing. For saying it's a Catholic name only because I'm not in a position to do that. Anything other than that, no, I don't apologize for any of it.
Before I let you go, this clean Catholic comedian, Jim Gaffigan, whom I don't know if you knew or not, he tweeted out the night of the convention, quote, F. Lou Holtz, I can't say the word, Biden is Catholic in name only compared to who? Do you know who he even is, Coach? And what did you expect a response like that and the ones you've gotten over the last week?
I don't have any idea who he is. And let me tell you once again, I don't care what anybody else thinks. I know what's in my heart. I try to please the Lord. I used to try to please my wife, but I lost her 6 weeks ago. I'm not here to try to please everybody in the world. All I want to make sure is when I look in the mirror, I'm comfortable with myself. I've done the right thing. And when I speak and pray at night and look at my day and the things I've done, I want to be comfortable with it and know that I please the Lord. That's the only one I need to please.
Coach Lou Holtz, I thank you for being here. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bishop Joseph Strickland is coming up, but first some news. The current head of the Diocese of Hong Kong is urging his priests to avoid offensive and provocative language in their homilies. Cardinal John Tong Han, the apostolic administrator of the diocese, issued the warning amid the latest crackdown by the communist government on Hong Kong. According to his statement, slandering and offensive expressions insinuating hatred and social disorder are unchristian and inappropriate for the liturgy, end quote. While the cardinal's letter does not specifically reference the ongoing political unrest in the city, it does call for prudence by priests in the subjects about which they choose to preach. In the past, Tong has spoken in support of the so-called national security law, which went into effect in Hong Kong in July. And on Thursday, Pope Francis assured ecological experts that the Catholic Church is committed to defending the planet from exploitation. The Pope told a French delegation that the Christian commitment to the environment was rooted in the Bible, saying, quote, "The Bible teaches us that the world was not born of chaos or chance, but of a decision of God, who called it, and always calls it, into existence out of love. It is by healing the human heart that one can hope to heal the world from its social and environmental unrest." Also, during his first public audience Wednesday since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic 6 months ago, Pope Francis called for a worldwide day of prayer for Lebanon. On August 4th, a massive explosion at a fertilizer storage facility tore through Beirut, devastating the city and sending the country into further economic and social unrest. The day of prayer and fasting is set for Friday, September 4th. Now I want to continue the conversation we've been having about public policy positions by avowed Catholics and the role of laity and the clergy to call out those inconsistencies in a political season. Joining me with insight and analysis is Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas. Your Excellency, thank you for being here. A number of Catholics, clergy and laity, are calling out Catholics who are in the public square who support policies that undermine and defy church teaching. You just heard Lou Holtz. But now bishops are stepping out, seemingly defending Catholics like Joe Biden and others. This is Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago. Listen.
There should never be a time and a moment in which we judge others in their faith journey, say that a person is not Christian enough or Catholic enough.
Your Excellency, what is the answer here? Are public figures whose records are well known eligible for scrutiny when it comes to the practice of their faith and the way they implement it in the public sphere?
Well, Raymond, I believe they absolutely are. And as a pastor, I believe ultimately, before God, all the titles fall away, and we are simply either sons or daughters of God. And I think we need to put it all back into that context, whether you are an already elected official, whether you're a candidate, whether you're someone voting, whether you're a bishop, whether you're a priest, wherever you are in life, we are children of God. The scriptures tell us this very clearly as a joyful part of being baptized and members of the body of Christ in our faith, in the Catholic tradition. And so as a pastor, I would say that we need to tell everyone who claims to be Catholic what those tenets are. We have the deposit of faith that basically tells us, go to the catechism. And for any candidate or for any voter, I would say we all need to go to the catechism and measure, is what I'm saying resonating with what the Catholic Church teaches?
Bishop Strickland, I want to dig a little deeper here. In mid-August, when the Biden campaign named Kamala Harris as Joe Biden's running mate, the Federalist ran a piece critical of both Harris and Biden for her public attacks on Catholics, including the Knights of Columbus. You tweeted a response. You wrote, "Catholics take note. Reminds me of another candidate calling us the deplorables. We need to be awake to this. Kamala's anti-Catholic assault previews her potential administration," which is the title of the article. Now, Bishop Strickland, you've not been the only prelate to speak out publicly about the discord here between church teaching and these Democratic candidates. Providence Bishop Thomas Tobin tweeted out, "Biden-Harris, first time in a while the Democratic ticket hasn't had a Catholic on it. Sad." Bishop Rick Stika of Memphis came out with a strong statement on August 21st. He said, "Don't understand how Mr. Biden can claim to be a good and faithful Catholic as he denies so much of church teaching, especially on the absolute child abuse and human rights violations of the most innocent and not yet born." When you and your brother bishops criticize the Democratic candidates here or single out Biden's policy positions on these non-negotiable issues such as abortion, are you judging his heart, him as a man, as a person?
No. I mean, as Cardinal Cupich said, we shouldn't judge, but we should call people back to the truth. And the church teaches that abortion is intrinsically evil. There is never a time when we can intervene and take the life of an unborn child just because of whatever. And so that's the teaching of the faith.
The issue here to me, and I think we should make this clear, it's not as if you bishops went out to pick a fight with a political candidate. You have a political candidate who's saying, "Hey, world, I'm a good Catholic. Vote for me because I'm Catholic," and then misrepresenting that teaching or voting and supporting policies at odds with the professed faith. You're clarifying, it seems to me, that, not trying to insert yourself into politics or make the church a political instrument.
Absolutely. And I try to be very cautious because there's no party and no candidate that really lines up to take care of all the issues that we need to face as Catholics. But the reason I was willing to tweet regarding Kamala Harris is that she opened the door. She basically said, if you're a member of the Knights of Columbus, a fine Catholic men's organization, that you're not fit to serve in this government. She opened that door of crossing over into judging religious practice. And so that's where I felt more comfortable saying, well, this candidate is clearly not with the Catholic Church. And so, I think that we do need to be careful. And frankly, I don't want to endorse any candidate because there are problems on every side. I mean, it's a difficult situation, but
but people need guidance.
We have to call the candidates back to the truth.
And people need guidance. The Catholic faithful going to the voting polls, they need their conscience formed. And let's face it, they're not terribly formed right now. I want to read something to you. Father James Martin tweeted this out. I'm seeing more priests saying voting for Joe Biden is a mortal sin. It is not. It is not a sin to vote for either Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump. Your take on that. Is it a sin to vote for a candidate who supports abortion on demand really up until birth?
Well, I do think we have to be careful about, just broadcasting. If you do this, you're committing a mortal sin. I mean, sin is, it's more nuanced than that. But certainly to say, if you want to be faithful to your Catholic faith, to vote for a candidate who is obviously contradicting the doctrine of our faith, the deposit of faith that every bishop promised to guard, then we need to really pay attention to that. If a candidate clearly says they support abortion, that becomes a marker for really eliminating the ability for a faithful Catholic to elect that person. A lot of people get upset with me for focusing so much on abortion, but the child in the womb can't focus on themselves. I mean, we hear a lot of noise. I know you probably hear more than I do. People, thankfully, in our nation still can speak up with all kinds of ideas. A child in the womb has no voice to speak up with. So I feel obligated as a shepherd, as a pastor in the church, to speak for them.
And the bishops have made the life issue a primordial issue. It is the preeminent issue for the bishops, and even in their faithful citizenship document, which they've renewed every year, that has remained preeminent, and sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle here. Bishop Strickland, before I let you go, there's another story this week that made headlines. On Sunday, Father Kenneth Baller, he's the pastor of the Church of St. Francis Xavier in New York City. He offered a prayer during Mass. Now, this was a statement of racial solidarity in the form of a baptismal promise renewal. I'd like your reaction to it.
I now invite you to stand and join us in the prayer for racial justice by responding yes to each of the following statements. Do you support racial justice, equity, and compassion in human relations? Yes. Do you affirm that white privilege is unfair and harmful to those who have it and to those who do not? Yes. Do you affirm that white privilege and the culture of white supremacy must be dismantled wherever it is present? Yes.
Bishop, your thoughts on inserting these types of statements into the Mass. First of all, is that licit? And are you concerned about the imposition of a political agenda or a political prism of protest upon the liturgy and the faithful?
Well, I am concerned, and it really steps away from what should be happening at the Catholic liturgy. For one thing, it should be focused on God. It should be the sacrifice of the Son that we are joining in to the offering, the great everlasting offering of the Son of God to the Father for our salvation. That, what I just heard doesn't sound like it fits into the context of the Eucharistic liturgy. It sounds more like a political statement. And the whole question of white privilege, I think we need to be very careful with as people of faith, because it's just not nuanced, and it starts to get into the political sphere where it's like this is good and this is bad, where it's all mixed together. I pointed people to the Black Lives Matter website because it's on their website, that they want to dismantle the nuclear family. I'm not sure what kind of family there is, except a nuclear family, a man and a woman committed for life in a marriage and their children. And they want to dismantle that. There was nothing mentioned about the fathers or the dads in their website. And the other issues about God made us male and female, and in going back to Genesis, and there was a word I'm not even familiar with, but something about not embracing the idea that God has made us basically heterosexual. If the human race is going to continue, then heterosexual relationships are how that's going to happen. They want to dismantle that. So I think certainly going back to the specific quote, that I think is inappropriate in the context, like you said, sounding like almost like baptismal promises. And I could tell you, if a priest did that in this diocese here in East Texas, a pretty conservative area, I would have gotten calls, and I think a lot of the congregation would probably have walked out, or certainly wouldn't have stood and said yes, because it's buying into a political agenda that is one-sided and is a distortion, really, of history. Simple answer, I would say that what the priest did was inappropriate for the Eucharistic liturgy. For someone to come from the other side and do something similar, I would see as equally inappropriate.
Yeah. Bishop Joseph Strickland, thank you for your clarity and for coming on the show this evening.
Thanks, Raymond. God bless you.
This week, the U.S. Marshal Service found 25 missing children in Ohio, and last week they rescued 39 missing kids in Georgia. All this part of a long-running mission known as Operation Not Forgotten. It's estimated that there are thousands of trafficking victims in the United States each year. Joining me now to discuss the issue of human trafficking in the United States and around the world and why these recent rescues are making so very little news is attorney and child advocate Liz Yore. Liz, welcome back to the program. How significant is this recovery of scores of children in Georgia and Ohio when we look at human trafficking, specifically child trafficking in the U.S.?
Raymond, this is very significant. The Trump administration from day one really made a strong effort and emphasis and initiative on all sorts of levels, state, federal, and local, to really find these vulnerable children. And many of these vulnerable children are runaways, endangered runaways, what they call throwaway children, children from foster care, children who have been very, very vulnerable and involved in all sorts of heinous abuse. And as a result, they become victims almost immediately to human traffickers. And we know that in the United States, there are probably around over 400,000 missing children. Many of those children get snared in the trap of human trafficking. It's a very lucrative business. We know that the cartels are involved in it. The gangs, the street gangs are involved in it. ISIS is involved in human trafficking because although drugs are sold and then they can't be sold again, children, women, boys can be resold. And for example, one child can make around $250,000 a year for a trafficker. So these initiatives, and what's really exciting about this is that the U.S. Marshals are uniquely suited to finding missing children. They execute warrants on missing persons all the time. And this has been a coordinated effort. We've heard a lot about, in these riots, the federal government saying there needs to be a partnership with local, state, and the Fed. That's what's happening in human trafficking. These children are being found as a result of task forces with state and local, with the marshals really heading it up. And millions of dollars are being diverted from other programs by the Trump administration into human trafficking. Ivanka Trump, Trump's daughter has been very active in really promoting this. And, quite frankly, I know that your audience, Raymond, is very engaged in trying to help children. I've seen that time and time again. The media, not so much.
Liz, children make up 27% of all human trafficking victims worldwide, and 2 out of every 3 identified child victims are girls. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are 40.3 million victims of human trafficking globally, with hundreds of thousands in the United States. Where does most trafficking in the U.S. occur? In what cities and states? And how do these traffickers find their victims?
That's a great question. Well, for example, the #1 destination, state destination, is Florida. The locale where the trafficking most often occurs is in motels, the flea bag motels. How they get these children, an array of ways. One, sometimes parents drug-addicted parents turn over their children to traffickers for money, as heinous as that is. Oftentimes, it's foster care kids who go on the run. And, these traffickers know exactly where the foster care group homes are. So these girls and boys will often go running, and within 20 minutes, they're picked up by traffickers who promise them, oh, I'll get you a meal, I'll drive you to your home. And before they know it, they're involved in this awful, illegal, horrible web of human trafficking that they can't get out of. And so we know hotels should be trained. We know even these kids from foster care. Now, when I was doing human trafficking investigations, to my horror, I learned that children in foster care were trafficked internationally. And the Super Bowl, they'd go down to these Caribbean islands. They would, where the people and predators were, that's where the children went. And so there's an array of ways in which that happens. There's over 25,000 what we call endangered runaways in the United States. Those children often run to places like Portland and Seattle. And what troubles me so as we go through this horrible summer is that law enforcement resources are being spent, Raymond, on dealing with the rioters and not in finding these children who are missing and who are endangered, who many of them are living on the street. And so as a result, we really have to reorder our priorities. And that's why I think these arrests and recoveries in Ohio and Georgia are so exciting.
Yeah. Now, the Trump administration has set aside about $35 million to help these trafficking victims. But the administration has also been criticized, Liz, for inserting this line in the grants application beginning in 2018 for aid to trafficking victims. It reads, direct representation on vacatur, to set aside a judgment, or expungement matters through court filings or through other litigation services is not allowable, an allowable cost under this cooperative agreement, okay? Now, many victims have to deal with criminal charges due to the activities they were involved in when they were trafficked, even if those activities were not of their choosing. What legal help is there for these victims of human trafficking that are involved in prostitution or other activities before they escape from the traffickers?
Well, there has been a number of states that have efforts to identify victims, to decriminalize human trafficking victims in the court system, and to divert them to resources like this $35 million, which will be going directly to resources. And frankly, Raymond, there has been virtually no money until now going towards the victims. These are highly traumatized girls and young girls who oftentimes at the age of 12, that's the average age, these girls are lured into prostitution or human trafficking. So by the time they're 16, 17, they have been through, the trauma of human trafficking is beyond imaginable. And so as a result, this money spent on resources is absolutely critical. There's been virtually, they recover these kids and then they're off on the street. back on the street because they have nowhere to go. And so this $35 million will be well spent in finding homes, a safety net, psychological testing and counseling for these girls, employment help, so these girls can rebuild their lives.
I only have about 2 minutes here, Liz, so I need to cover something else with you, and this is kind of a two-parter. There's been very little coverage of these rescues of these girls and these human trafficking victims in the press here in the U.S. But there was a piece in the New York Times Magazine last weekend that sought to depict men caught in these child sex stings as somehow being victimized or victims of entrapment. Your thoughts on the New York Times advocacy and the lack of coverage in general about this human trafficking topic and those who've been rescued?
You know, there's been precious little done to really punish the Johns, the men who procure these children. And as a result, you know, to paint them as victims is absurd. The more we can identify them, put their pictures in the paper, prosecute them, the better. The reason why, I think it's a multi-phase reason why there's very little coverage on the recovery. First of all, these are vulnerable children. You know, and the media has no time for vulnerable children. They don't want to give they think that the public isn't interested when in fact the public wants to do whatever they can, big or small, to help these children. And so as a result, the success of recovering children, getting these Johns off the street and prosecuted, getting these traffickers behind bars for decades is important work, and it sends a signal, a deterrent signal, not only to the children that somebody is looking for them. And you know, that was an interesting comment in the articles about the Georgia case and the Ohio case. The children were saying, I didn't know anybody was out there looking for me. It's so good to know someone's looking for me. And so with respect to that, there needs to be more coverage. And we need the public to have eyes and ears on human trafficking. It's in plain sight. And we also need to have good foster parents, good adoptive parents, and quite frankly, having the Catholic Church build schools and high schools and centers in the inner city, be that safety net for these children who often become victims of human traffickers.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz, for your insight and your passion. I know you've dedicated much of your life to this topic. You can follow Liz Yore's work at Yore, Y-O-R-E, children.com. And if you know of or suspect cases of human trafficking in your area, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They're at 888-373-7888. 888-373-7888. The information is on your screen. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
He's a historian and professor of political science at Grove City College in Pennsylvania, and he's written a very timely new book, The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration. Here to discuss it and the influence of socialism on our current political landscape is Dr. Paul Kengor. Paul, thanks for being here. You have said that this book badly needed to be written. Why, and why now?
Well, Raymond, I mean, I've never seen a time in American history when so many people are praising socialism and even communism. I mean, the numbers are really kind of shocking. It was bad enough to see for a while, right, those Gallup poll numbers where they would ask millennials or Americans generally, do you prefer socialism or capitalism, right? There's kind of, a little this way, then it gets even, then it gets, suddenly socialism, 46%, capitalism, 44%. But now you're even finding high numbers of young people and people across the board that are even saying positive things about Marxism. And one of the things that you see in the polls, too, in the numbers, well, not in all the polls, but those that ask, is if there's any kind of ray of hope or silver lining in this, Raymond, is when they ask people, well, how do you define Marxism, communism? They'll say, well, it's about people sharing, right? It's about people being kind to one another. And what I mean by a ray of hope in that is it's clear they don't know what it is. So if
Right.
folks like me and you and EWTN, I mean, if we can educate people that, yeah, the Communist Manifesto says the entire communist theory may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property, right? Quote, abolition of the family, exclamation mark. Even the most radical flare up of this infamous proposal of the communists. That's direct language from the manifesto. If people would learn this stuff, then maybe they'd stop and say, well, gee, I don't think I really want to abolish private property. I don't think I want to abolish my right of inheritance, right, of all of my parents' money. So if we could just educate people, there might be a window here, an opportunity to change things. And man, when they learn about, literally the Devil and Karl Marx, some of the stuff that Marx wrote, some of his poetry, some of this kind of dark side of Marx's personal life, I'll tell you, they ain't going to like what they see there either.
Yeah, well, the heart of your book is about Marx's vicious attack on religion. He also had a fascination of sorts with the devil, and you focus attention on his writings, particularly the poetry and his prose. On religion, Marx famously wrote, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. And in a piece of poetry, as you referenced, the Pale Maiden, Marx writes, thus heaven I forfeited, I know it full well, my soul once true to God is chosen for hell. Now, you argue that Marxism is very much the fruit of Marx's ideas, and those who try to separate the man from the ideology miss the point. Why? Why do you think they try to make that separation?
Yeah, because I mean, really, at its basis, it's a spiritual battle, right? I mean, this is, to quote Pope Benedict XVI, Marxists envisioned this new Jerusalem on earth, this atheistic utopia. They really did believe that man lives on bread alone. Isn't it ironic that Jesus tells the tempter, Satan, man does not live on bread alone, but the Marxists wanted this strictly material world.
Marxism was rejected by the Catholic leadership early on. However, it did gain a foothold in parts of the church as communism spread during the 20th century, certainly in liberation theology. Do you see the effects of Marxism in the church today?
Well, yeah, I think you could say that. And look, the church opposed this from the very beginning, Raymond. I mean, the Communist Manifesto was published in 1848. The first papal encyclical opposing communism was called Qui Pluribus by Pope Pius IX in 1846, 2 years before the Communist Manifesto was even published. Then came encyclical after encyclical, Leo XIII, Pius X, Pius XI, Pius XII. Pius XI, Pius XII, Divini Redemptoris, the encyclical in the 1930s, referred to communism as a satanic scourge orchestrated by the sons of darkness. I talk in the book at length about the claims of Bella Dodd. And Bella Dodd is the one who indeed seems to have said, and Alice von Hildebrand, among others, can testify to this, that she, as a communist organizer for the Communist Party in the 1930s, she began organizing teachers, and she claimed that in the 1930s she helped place, quote, over 1,000 communist men, unquote, in Catholic seminaries. Now, I was not able to confirm that or prove that in the book, but she did seem to say that, and I walked through the numbers, Raymond. Was that feasible? I mean, it sounds like just a gigantic number, right? 1,000 communist men in seminaries. Well, at the time, I mean, we're looking at 30,000 and then upward into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, 60,000 men in Catholic seminaries, priests at the time. And Bella Dodd pulled off numbers like that with the teachers union merely in the state of New York. So it's quite feasible. It's quite possible that happened. And if it did happen, at least to some extent, it probably, helps to explain. Yeah, I think, look, it's hard to say A led to B, led to C, but you do see elements like liberation theology in the 1960s and 1970s. And I think it's probably not completely unrelated.
Polls have revealed, and you mentioned this earlier, that many young American voters favor socialism over capitalism. 70% of millennials would consider voting for a socialist candidate. What has given rise to this socialism chic, and why are we seeing more and more of it explicitly voiced in American politics?
Well, in American politics and also in the American Catholic Church, Raymond, look, not to pick on them, but America Magazine, the Jesuit magazine, last summer of 2019, actually published a piece called The Catholic Case for Communism. The Catholic Case for Communism. And I can tell you, I mean, you go back to like Pius XII's 1949 papal decree on communism, that might well have gotten you excommunicated
right.
at one point in the Catholic Church. I quote Dorothy Day's The Catholic Worker in the 1930s saying, no, you cannot be a Catholic and a communist, right? Yeah, that's Dorothy Day. Quadragesimo Anno in the 1930s, right, by Pope Pius XI. One cannot be at the same time a true Catholic and a socialist. The two are incompatible. So, but unfortunately, this has happened. It's crept into American culture, American society, American politics, and the church. And I think the answer, Raymond, is really education, education, education. We have miseducated since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Look, take someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's Catholic, right, or claims to be Catholic. And I don't mean that as a judgmental statement. I don't know how Catholic she really is. I don't know what church she belongs to. But she was recently noted by the National Catholic Reporter. They called her the future of the Catholic Church. She was 4 weeks old when the Berlin Wall fell. Okay, 4 weeks old. And she represents a generation that's gone through our public schools and our universities who didn't learn any of this stuff that you and I are talking about today, about the horrors of communism.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And AOC is the future of the Catholic Church, like I'm the future of Mormonism, okay? In a recent article, American Spectator, you point out that Marxist ideology is even being promoted by Teen Vogue. Now, that magazine over the summer, they released a piece on Twitter advocating the abolition of police, okay? And they tweeted the following: while we're working to abolish the police, we must also work to dismantle what the police were put here to protect: property. Now, this sounds right out of the Marxist handbook. How has Marxism become so deeply embedded in the popular culture, and why?
Yeah, and what's further outrageous about this, Raymond, is that here we are in this cancel culture today, right? Where, I mean, one bad statement or questionable statement that one figure made somewhere in the past, I mean, they want to rename John Wayne Airport. I'm a Reagan scholar. I've written about this. There was a remark that Reagan made to Richard Nixon in a private phone conversation in 1972 that has people wanting to rename Reagan National Airport. Well, if you look at what Karl Marx said, all right, this guy was a racist. He was anti-Semitic. He was absolutely sexist. He had a terrible family life. Two of Marx's daughters, Raymond, committed suicide in suicide pacts with their husbands. All right, I mean, that's unusual. That's unusual. He impregnated the family nursemaid. Her name was Lenchen. Didn't pay her a penny. Denied that the child was his when the child was born. Never paid the child a penny. Is on Jews, the anti-Semitic statements from this guy who was an ethnic Jew. He came from a long family of rabbis. Said the Israelite faith is repulsive to me. Said what is the worldly God of what is a bill of exchange of the Jew? Money. Really highly insulting statements about Jews. Use the N-word all the time. Why are we canceling Karl Marx? Right? This is kind of like Margaret Sanger, who speaks to the Silver Lake, New Jersey women's chapter of the KKK in May 1926, writes about it in her memoirs, pages 366 and 367. I know the page numbers because we read it in my class every year. And there are still things named for Margaret Sanger. She hasn't been canceled. You have professors with busts of Karl Marx in their offices. Marx gets away with this. Instead, we're tearing down statues of Washington, Jefferson, Ulysses S. Grant, Junipero Serra, St. Louis. So the hypocrisy is really disturbing. And again, it comes down to, I think, this issue of education. It's what our kids are being taught, and they're not being taught. And in the case of Marx and Marxism, they're being taught to prefer it, to like it, not to condemn it.
Paul, I only have 30 seconds. I want to read this to you and get your reaction. You write, both classical Marxists and cultural Marxists see history as a series of struggles that divide the world into hostile, antagonistic groups of oppressors and the oppressed. Both seek out victim groups as the anointed group that will also serve as society's redeemer group. The victim group becomes the agent for emancipation in ushering in the new and better world. Who is that victim group today, or the victim group du jour, and how should we see it in the context of Marxism here in America?
It's constantly evolving, Raymond. It's constantly changing. If you go to the websites of Communist Party USA or People's World, which is the successor to the Daily Worker, and unfortunately this is part of what I do, right? It's an occupational hazard of the work that I do. They use an interesting phrase. They say they are seeking cultural workers. They actually use that term at the About section of People's World. In a way, Raymond, they've given up on the factory floor, right? They know that the West Virginia coal miner is going to vote for Trump, right? They've given up on the mill worker, the steel worker, the coal miner. They use at People's World the acronym LGBTQIA+. They're looking for what they call cultural workers. So it's this constant casting about for new victim groups that they could use to fulfill the kind of Marxist vision of fundamentally transforming the Judeo-Christian order.
Yeah, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for the time. The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration by Paul Kengor is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond. God bless.
Excellent. And now some good news. My first picture book, The Spider Who Saved Christmas, is being released in October, just in time for the holidays. It revives an ancient legend surrounding the Christmas story. It's full of suspense, and it points to the hope that can be found even in the darkest of places and circumstances. It speaks to our time. I think you and your family will love it. It's great for kids. You can pre-order it now at EWTN's Religious Catalog, on Amazon, or go to discoverlegends.com for more information. Also, 3 installments of the Will Wilder saga are also available in paperback and audiobook, hardcover. Visit willwilderbooks.com for a preview and order yours. And don't forget, The World Over is a podcast. You can take us on the go. Download us at iTunes or Spotify. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.